In this video, we're going to cover unemployment insurance. We're going to talk about eligibility, what happens at the federal level. We'll cover economic theory. We'll discuss why unemployment insurance reduces employment, how it serves as a layoff subsidy, how it's a factor in long-term unemployment, and then we'll talk about options for reform. The sort of first part of this, the basics of it, are coming from a EconLib article titled Unemployment Insurance by David Francis. This is part of the concise Encyclopedia of Economics. Okay, so first, what is unemployment insurance? Unemployment insurance is intended to offset income lost by workers who lose their jobs as a result of employer cutbacks. This was initially launched as a part of Social Security back in 1935. Its secondary goal is to counteract negative impacts on economies from recessions, so try to kind of hold up the economy when recessions happen. In theory, it does this by helping people maintain jobs so that it holds up economic activity, including consumption and production. Now, unemployment insurance has some specific guidelines from eligibility. Not all workers are eligible for unemployment insurance. In fact, between 84 and 89, less than 34% of the unemployed were receiving these benefits. By 91, this was up to 76%, so quite a big expansion in who's eligible over time. Now, you're not eligible if you are fired for cause. You're not eligible if you quit. You're not eligible if you enter the job market and don't have a job, right? You have to have had a job and been fired, but not for cause, sort of a layoff, if you can think about it that way. And you're not eligible if you are re-entering the market. So you have to have had a job and lost a job, and it can't have been your fault. You can't have quit. It's not for people that are re-entering or just initially entering the market. Okay, so we're just kind of going to go over some facts. The proportion of unemployed workers who receive benefits is always higher during recessions than expansions, right? This is natural, as that's what's going to cause there to be layoffs, is recessions and economic activity. Probably one of the most well-known facts is that unemployment insurance covers 26 weeks of unemployed benefits after your 1 week waiting period that follows up being laid off. It's typically about a third of gross wages. In 2020, as part of the CARES Act, we saw that go up by $300 a month. And this is for below average or below average workers. In terms of workers, in terms of what their pay is. Okay, the average weekly benefits back in the early 90s was $161. Like I said, that's kind of fluctuated in recent years, but it's a good number to think about. You're probably in the ballpark of 200, but like we said, that went up an extra 300. I think that's 300 a month. Don't quote me on that. I'll have to look that up. In situations where the state unemployment is very high, you can actually get an additional 13 weeks in some situations. So if the state as a whole is experiencing lots of unemployment, then benefits will go up. Costs for this program are typically split roughly equally between the state and the federal government in terms of their expenditure burdens. So the federal government gives out grants to the states for the administration of unemployment insurance. These grants exceeded $2 billion in the early 90s. They're much higher than that now. So federal law requires all state governments to impose a tax on employers of at least 1/8 of a percentage point on each employee's first $7,000 of pay. The tax base exceeds $7,000 in many states. Average is probably closer to 10, maybe 8,000, somewhere in there. And you've got bases that can be as high as into the 20s. Alaska is the classic example of this. And then you pay a higher rate if you're a firm that has a history of having high layoffs, but the tax rate can never go below the minimum, even if a business has no layoffs. So you've got a minimum, and you've got kind of an upper state maximum, right? It's set by each state, but you've got a maximum, and typically you don't offset. So if an employer has very high layoff rates, they don't actually pay enough tax revenues relative to their share of the unemployment that's happening in that state. Okay, so what we want to do now is think a little bit about the implications of this, right? And the economic theory is very straightforward. When you subsidize something, you get more of it. Just like we talked about with income tax, if you tax something, you get less of it. Incomes are the rewards to work and labor and productivity. You will get less of that if you tax it. Unemployment insurance subsidizes unemployment, right? Therefore, you will get more unemployment. So an example of this, one economist that studied this is Bruce Meyer, and he found a 10% boost in the replacement ratio, so the proportion of after-tax work earnings replaced by unemployment benefits, causes unemployed to extend their time without work by an average of a week and a half. This was during this time window of the study. The average duration of benefits was 13 and a half weeks, so that's quite substantial, right? That's a 10% increase, so that's basically a 1-to-1 ratio in the study. Now, most people who receive unemployment insurance will get recalled or find a new job in a matter of a few weeks, but we see that your jobless period will end up being longer, and the chances of finding a job typically rise as we see the benefits then run out, right? So it's pretty clear story that people are reacting in the rational way that we would expect them to react to getting unemployment subsidies. Scott Sumner argues unemployment insurance reduces employment. This is one of the most well-established claims of all time in all of economics. This is simple rationality, simple, straightforward scientific evidence. Sumner lays out 4, but I'm gonna repeat 3 of the good pieces of evidence. One is very simply, economic research shows that unemployment insurance reduces employment. 2, economic theory. So if you've got the empirics and the theory together, this is a strong case for anything. He also mentions just sort of casual observation, but the other one that I want to explore is just introspection, right? If you had a bad job, you end up being let go, laid off, and you were offered to be paid to sit at home, you'd take that offer, right? It's just as straightforward. Now, what you find is even economists that would be sort of more left of center, more left wing, Brad DeLong, Larry Summers, Paul Krugman, all very high profile economists that are on the more progressive side of things, they agree with this. And in fact, some of the things that we're going to talk about next actually come from Larry Summers. So this is pretty uncontroversial opinion in economics. Now, it turns out that unemployment essentially works as a layoff subsidy. Unionized firms tend to take greater advantage of this layoff subsidy than do non-union establishments. Not surprisingly, given the incentives, layoffs are more common for those who are eligible for unemployed benefits than those who are not. And if benefits are extended beyond 26 weeks, the unemployed tend to stay out of work a day longer on average for each week of the extension. Again, we've referenced Summers, and he studies this long-term unemployment, but a study with Harvard economist Kim Clark found that unemployment insurance almost doubles the number of unemployment spells lasting more than 3 months. So this encourages long-term joblessness. This brings us to an idea called the reservation wage, right? So what the mechanism by which this is happening is your unemployment insurance raises your reservation wage, which is the lowest wage a potential worker will insist upon before accepting a job. You can think of this as capturing the idea of opportunity cost. If you don't have a job, but your life is very nice and comfortable, then your reservation wage will be very high. If you have lots of needs and your life is not very comfortable without a job, your reservation wage will be lower. Your unemployment insurance thereby raises your reservation wage. So what causes long-term unemployment, right? And if we want to understand unemployment, we really want to understand long-term unemployment. The economic literature shows that there are basically two causes. Those are welfare payments and unemployment insurance. And these programs contribute to long-term unemployment in two very important ways. First, they increase measured unemployment. So you're prompting people who are not working to claim they're looking for work when they are not. So your work registration requirement for welfare recipients and your job search requirement for unemployment compels people who otherwise would not be part of the labor force to register as if they were. So there's some like false unemployment being raised here, right? This effectively increases the measure of the unemployed in the labor force, even if these people are really not unemployed. They're not actively looking for work. The second way this plays out is by contributing to long-term unemployment through an incentive and a means in order to not work. This is where that reservation wage comes back into play. So the unemployment insurance raises your reservation wage, so the minimum wage that a worker insists on before accepting a job goes up. Therefore, more people are unemployed or stayed unemployed longer. So it's lower cost to the unemployed to remain unemployed, and it's a higher cost to taxpayers. So what are our options for reform? Obviously, we could reduce the minimum tax. We could incentivize firms to not be engaged in laying off firms as much. We could raise the maximum tax. So firms that are, and this is state level, so these reforms would happen at state level things. But it's a federal policy, so you could also include incentives to encourage the states to widen these ranges, reduce the minimum tax, raise the maximum tax, and so you end up encouraging firms. You more closely align firm incentives with not laying people off. You could also have an experience rate, right? So if, say you have a worker, they get laid off multiple times, that ends up raising their taxes. They contribute back to the unemployment insurance that they had taken out. I'm not sure that this is the best of reform. It's one that gets thrown around a lot. It has an obvious problem, right, where this can sort of snowball on a worker if they're laid off. You just, as a not related to their performance, then you can actually create a situation where that person then becomes more and more likely to be laid off. So not sure that's a good plan, but I see the basic logic behind it. But probably the best one is this lump sum payout reform, right? So our unemployment insurance is considered bizarre by many economists. For example, Scott Sumner, who we've talked about already, right? Say you had automobile insurance and it worked the same way. You have an accident, the insurance company pays you $400 a week each week for the car that was out of commission up to 26 weeks. But then once you get the car repaired and it's back in commission, they stop paying you. This would clearly incentivize people to delay in repairing the car, right? And that's why private insurance companies pay lump sum upfront right after the accident. So if you do the same thing for unemployment insurance, you can get the kind of protection that we were talking about and reduce the work disincentives. So this proposal is suggested as a win-win proposition by economists Linder and Reiser. And so I'm going to read this little abstract, kind of give you an oversight. Give you an overview of what it is that they find. They say, quote, "We estimate the effect of front-loading unemployment benefits on non-employment duration and reemployment wages, exploiting a sharp change in the path of benefits for those who claimed unemployment benefits after November 2005. We show that non-employment duration fell by 2 weeks while reemployment rose by 1.4% as a result of front-loading. We show that these behavioral responses were large enough to offset the mechanical cost increase of unemployment insurance. We argue our results indicate that benefit front-loading was Pareto improving policy reform as both unemployed and employed workers were made better off."